So I actually grew up in like small town Oklahoma, outside of Tulsa. That's where I originally grew up. Went to high school in Tulsa. Played basketball throughout my youth, and like that was my first love. So like basketball is very heavily influenced in my upbringing and certainly growing up.
Nice.
So I'm from Tulsa, played a lot of, like I said, played a lot of AAU basketball, high school basketball, etc. And that was a lot of part of my life, kind of growing up.
You a big guy
And
or like a guard?
I'm a point guard. I'm 6'2", a little over 6'2". So I was a point guard. I was like
That's
kind
a
of
big,
like,
that's a big point guard.
yeah, but like I played with guys who were all like, 6'4", 6'5". Like a couple
Right.
went and played overseas. Like Tyler Lockett, who's a wide receiver for the Seahawks, played on my AAU team, and I grew up with
Oh wow.
him. So like it was a bunch of athletes, right? And certainly like I'm a pretty good athlete, but I was, certainly on the bottom end of the athleticism, even on my team there. Or so
Right.
in terms of the AAU team. But we were, we were pretty nasty. But yeah, that was kind of where I grew up. So from Oklahoma, I have some family up east, so I've been around New York a fair amount growing up, and Philly in particular. Went to school, University of Arkansas. Kind of went there. While I was at University of Arkansas, I started like booking shows. So started like promoting music shows and got in charge of like the university program there, where they were like had a big budget to book concerts. So while I was there, ended up kind of like having a few $100,000 budget to promote and book shows on behalf of the university.
Hmm.
So really got into music at that point, particularly live music. I always like loved it at that time, but that is kind of the next thing that really like took off in my life was music and live music, and did that. Worked for a bunch of music festivals over the summers while I was in college, and doing all kinds of odd jobs from stage managing to like assistant talent buying to like you name it, did all kinds of things. Um, and through that, I was like, went to school for finance, went to school for international business, and had a minor in Chinese at one point where I went and studied abroad in Shanghai for like 6 months. And then came back, and that's when all the music stuff really picked up at Arkansas. And I decided after school, after I graduated, I was like, I'm gonna take a shot at this music thing, instead of going to get like a job with like my finance degree or something in business or whatever. So I moved out to California, to Monterey, and took a job in a mailroom, essentially, doing like ticket counts predominantly for like all these, artist tours, et cetera, all these agents like booking shows. Um, and worked my way up from that mailroom to like a junior agent at that agency, which was Paradigm. Competed with like CAA and WME and like all kinds of cool music, mostly electronic stuff at that time. I kind of touched, but like also did. Paradigm represented everyone from like Fish, Dave Matthews Band, Skrillex, Disclosure, Coldplay, and like on down to like a lot more cooler stuff that was emerging at the time. Was in Monterey for a year. Decided I wanted to get to like New York or LA. Had an assistant open up, and took a job as an assistant with a big agent in New York. And moved to New York, and that was in 2016. So that was how I got to New York, I guess. And was there until 2020. And COVID happened, live music kind of, went down. Pretty much stopped completely with the onset of COVID. So like there wasn't shows to book, there wasn't like a lot of like tours or concerts happening, obviously. And I was like half out of a job, but still had a like they were still paying me, but like there wasn't much to do. It was this weird like pause moment across the company.
Yeah.
Um, and whenever that happened, I was like, oh, like live music and the music industry is sort of this like incestuous like social circle where your social life and your like professional life are like bled together. So it's everyone thinks it's like the sexiest job in the world because like it's fun. You get to work with artists, you get to work like with everything. You're out at shows, you're going to concerts every night or whatever else, and that was great. While I was in my 20s, but it felt like I couldn't pull myself out of it either. And like in some ways, COVID was a saving grace for that. And because I knew I didn't want to do it forever, and it was kind of like a treadmill you kind of get off of.
Right.
Um, So at that time, I was trying to figure out something new or what I wanted to do, but like found out that like being an agent in music is like you're kind of an entrepreneur and doing everything, but like most people don't understand what an agent does really. So it was difficult to translate. So I took a job with Rock Nation, running their brand partnership, which was like a little bit different than what I was doing, but it allowed me to talk to like big brands and talk to all these people. You know, different than like a concert venue promoter in Florida or Texas or wherever.
Right.
And through that, like I knew Rock Nation was a great place, like to kind of like make a step into more like brands, tech, etc. And that was great. So I did a bunch of brand deals for like Megan Thee Stallion and Fat Joe and Meek Mill and Lil Uzi Vert, and did a few for like LaMelo Ball and Skylar Diggins Smith on the sports side. And that actually came up because they found out my boss found out that I was really into crypto. And I had like tinkered around with crypto on the side since like kind of late 2019. And so a bunch of like crypto deals were coming in like into 2020, into first 2021, whenever like NFTs picked up, etc. So was there doing that, and I was at Rock for about a year and a half. And it was really, I enjoyed it, but I also knew like it wasn't an end all be all place for me to be forever. So did that, and I think at the end of 21, I was like, I'm spending all my free time looking at crypto stuff, right? Like not only NFTs, but like DeFi stuff after DeFi summer. Like I just thought all this stuff was so interesting. And I was like doing everything on chain, like spending dumb amounts of money, just like trying out different dApps, buying and selling NFTs, like you name it. Like was literally just like couldn't get enough. And at the end of 2021, I was like, this is taking up all my time. Like, this is the first time in my life that, like, besides like music and culture, which had made up most of my professional career at that point, like, this is all the things I'm interested in. It's like, I'm really curious. That's all I'm spending my free time in. And I was like, I got to figure out how to like get a job in this industry. Right. And I had made some pretty good connections through my time at Rock, doing some like deals with like finance people or OKX people or Unstoppable Domains or like a few others. Most of those deals didn't like come to anything. A few did, but made a lot of good contacts and talked to the Delphi digital guys at a certain point. And they were like, "Oh wow, like you actually know a lot about all this shit." And I was like, "I don't know. It's what I'm interested. I'm curious." And they're like a research shop, VC, and they're like young guys. They're all like similar to my age. I'm 31. And so like that gave me enough confidence to really start going out and trying to find a job. And this was like beginning of 2022. And talked to a few VCs to like as like an analyst associate and a couple of people. And I was like, I don't know, like I don't know a ton about VC out unless from the outside looking in. Didn't know if that was like the right thing. And then I had a friend of mine get hired by CoinDesk to run Consensus, their big event. And that friend ran like special projects as part of South by Southwest for a decade. So I knew him through music stuff. And ironically enough, he called me whenever I was at Rock and we were like talking about a Megan Thee Stallion, like South by Southwest thing. And like, that it was like a VR thing that like ended up happening. And then a month later, he like reaches out and like we set up a call and he calls me again. And I'm like, you're at CoinDesk. Like wasn't at South by anymore. And I was like, what are you doing at CoinDesk, dude? Like you're lost. You don't know anything about crypto. And it kind of dawned on me. I was like, you're going to need a lot of help. And like, I know CoinDesk, like, CoinDesk is like one of the few things in crypto that everyone knows, has a ton of brand awareness, particularly in the US. Outside of like Coinbase, it kind of felt like it had the most brand recognition of anything. And that felt safer than a lot of the other opportunities I was seeing in crypto to go work full time. So, plus I knew events. I'd done music festivals, and knew like large scale events, not quite like professional kind of events in the way that Consensus is, but close enough. And Brad was the guy's name at CoinDesk. And kind of offered me a job, and I jumped. My boss at Rock, like pat in the back, like I left on great terms at Rock Nation, which like wasn't always an easy thing to do in that building. Um, so that felt good, and then I was excited about that, and that was February of 22. Um, so was that CoinDesk for a couple years, but that first 6 months was still like a bull market more or less of crypto, and then FTX blew up that November of 2022, which was and I was happy at the time because I was at CoinDesk, right? I wasn't in a place that was exposed as much to like the downfall, right? CoinDesk still was for sure, and CoinDesk ended up getting sold, in part because of the FTX blow up. But and a quick story, I was in Lisbon, Portugal that week whenever FTX blew up, and for Solana's Breakpoint event and Web Summit, which is a big like Web2 conference. And the Thursday before Solana Breakpoint, which was over a weekend, Thursday, CoinDesk breaks the news that Alameda's balance sheet is like funny. And this was a Thursday, and like there wasn't much news. People started like, oh, it's odd. That looks weird. Like people starting to question a bit more. And then on Solana Breakpoint happens, it was kind of a big high moment of like the Solana ecosystem, et cetera. And that Tuesday, there was a flight back from Lisbon to New York, and took off at like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. in Lisbon and landed in New York like that night. And that was the entire day that FTX was blowing up. Like that was the day that like FTX came crashing down and like really, affected the Solana ecosystem maybe more than any other crypto ecosystem. And that was certainly just like a surreal moment. You had some of the biggest like Solana investors, VCs, teams, like all on this plane, either like asleep or like glued to their phone on Twitter, just like watching it all happen. It was very surreal. But yeah, so was there. That was just like a crazy moment. And fast forward to CoinDesk earlier this year, and I kind of decided that I was like done with my time at CoinDesk. Like it had been great, but I wanted to like help a lot of these founders, entrepreneurs, like build stuff. There's a lot of more like consumer stuff, interoperability, like permissionlessness or exciting things and consumer applications and stuff in crypto. So wanted to get closer to that stuff, and left CoinDesk to take a job at a company called Laser, which is a product development studio. We essentially have a team of engineers that we work with a lot of like early stage, but also bigger crypto companies to build out product. So we work very closely with like Coinbase, Uniswap, Polymarket, Alchemy, Privy, and like dozens of others. So it's been a fun ride since then, and I'm the head of the crypto unit internally. So it's been a really exciting time and very much growing. It was a very long-winded way, but I'm sure if you have any questions in that mix of stuff, happy to go deeper.
Yeah, no, that's great. I've got like a bunch of things to go deeper on. It's just a matter of choosing which. But first, a clarification question, or I guess a couple. One is on Laser. So it's not just crypto. Crypto is just one of like the sort of sectors that it develops products within, or is it?
Yeah. Yeah. So Laser started in 2019. The few founders came out of YC as a company called Fix, which was essentially Uber for mechanics. So you could like, have an app, and if you had a car at your house or whatever, a mechanic would come to you to fix the car. Right. Started as a product company. They like scaled it and sold it, decided to keep the core like engineering team and product team together and service like other YC backed companies who needed like, strong full stack engineering and design. So, that's how it started. Right. And that was back then in 2019. Servicing a bunch of like traditional like Silicon Valley tech type companies, etc. In like 2020 or 2021, they got closer with the Dapper team and helped build like the Flow SDK, helped build an NFL all day marketplace, and a bunch of other crypto projects. And ever since then, they've done work in crypto, but the last year or so, it's picked up a lot. They contributed or had a large part in Coinbase's on-chain summer last year, before I joined, and then we had a heavy part in it this year as well. So that's that. But yeah, Laser is like almost 70 engineers and like 15 or so designers, across like not just crypto, but anything fintech, AI, ML, a lot of general tech stuff, and a lot of e-commerce. We do a lot of bigger like Shopify builds, and work a lot with some of their bigger clients. So yeah, do a little bit of everything, I guess. Yeah.
So like for big companies, basically, if they want to just outsource a lot of development work or full projects, basically, they'll just outsource to you guys, and you guys will just like build them, and they'll sort of like white label it, and you can sort of just like be sort of abstracted away behind the scenes that you guys are actually responsible for building a lot of it.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, the exact model is we work on like an embedded model. And we don't just work with it's easy to name the big companies, right? But we work with a lot of like seed stage to Series A level startups who just like need an engineer because they can't hire fast enough, or they don't have the right skill sets, I mean, internally, or they just need something to build like fast and quick and like high level quality, right? So something that's different from Laser than a lot of other like engineering shops and stuff is we generally work on an embedded model. So we kind of like understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to build, and then figure out an engineer on our team that gets like embedded into that company to build X, Y, or Z for 8 weeks, 12 weeks at a time, whatever it may be. So that's like generally how we work. Yes, yeah, flexible headcount, but there is some stuff that's more project scoped, etc. Or we have a couple engineers that it's like, hey, we're working with the head of engineering at X company, and it's like, I can't pull my main engineers off my main thing, but I want to work on this thing in parallel or a side project of sorts or a second priority. And we build it, right? We don't take any of the IP, it's essentially like contractors, but with a pretty strong product focus.
Right. So switching back a little bit in your story to one of like the first things that I just sort of like noted was you grew up in Oklahoma, and you said you had like had family in the Northeast and whatnot. I don't know how like sort of how much you were like around and about, or if like Oklahoma was like a lot of what you knew at the time. But then regardless of whether you're from Oklahoma or New York or whatever, like going to China is a pretty large adjustment. I don't know if you had traveled extensively prior to that, like even to Europe or something like that, but what was that experience like going to China and studying abroad?
Yeah. So growing up in Oklahoma, I mean, my dad is from outside of Philly, so I would spend like a month or so outside of Philly every summer. So got to like travel to Northeast, be in New York, like kind of have an exposure to like that growing up. And we traveled, throughout the United States, but didn't really do much international travel really at all growing up. And when I went to a private high school to play ball, and transfer into from like a small town, they ended up having like a Chinese class, and I was like, that's cool. So I took like Chinese my like senior year of high school and was like interested in it. And then I ended up continuing to do that at the University of Arkansas as a freshman year, like took Chinese classes, etc. And after my freshman year of college, there was like a program that one of the older, a friend of mine that was a couple years older in college was going on. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, I want to go do that. And it just was like really a curiosity thing where like very culture shock. I think I'd been to Mexico and Canada before that. I'm not sure if I'd been to any other countries at that point in my life. And very, very different, right? Like very culture shock, but like also like you see a lot of Western influence. I was in Shanghai, that's in China, particularly around that time, which is like we're talking like 2012. And it was very, very cool. Like I haven't been back, but like I would really love to go back. And like by the end of that, like almost 6 months or so in China, like I was like conversationally like fluent in pieces, right? Like there were still bits of vocabulary and stuff, but like I could get around the city, order food, like talk to a cab driver, like talk to people. Like my Chinese was like okay enough to manage. And like, um, so it was just like a really cool experience. And I think for me, it just like really gave me a lot of perspective that I didn't have before. In addition to like a cool experience, just like seeing how big the world is and how different lifestyles, cultures, people are. And I think that like really served me in the in the rest part of my life, just because it gave me that perspective, even if I don't have any outlet to use my Chinese today, or like that program I was part of there didn't really like help me professionally per se, or I never leveraged it
Right.
professionally. But yeah.
Do you think you have a different like perspective on China? Like I think when people, if you don't have a real world experience, I think you tend to like sort of your default perspective is sort of informed by roughly like movies and mainstream media, or like movies and mainstream media
Hmm.
plus like maybe more like some Twitter now. And so I think that combination of things gives, a pretty particular perspective on China from a US point of view these days. Do you have maybe like a different perspective, or does it at least help like serve as like a bit of a filter because you're like, well, I'm seeing this. It's the thing that's what's it called? Um Totally blanking on the name. Oh, Gel-Man amnesia or whatever. Have you heard of this concept?
No, I don't think so.
I think it's called
Gel
Gel-Man
Man.
amnesia. It's basically like you know, you read a newspaper and you see the cover story that says something that I'm having trouble thinking of such like an abstract example, but basically you see something that you just know is not true at all. It's like, so for example, you
Mm.
read the newspaper and the headline says like, uh crypto is never coming back. And you're just like, well, look, like, obviously I don't know for sure, but like, it's not a statement that like crypto is not coming back. Like
Right.
I'm still bullish on crypto. And then you turn to the
Yeah.
next page and you see a strong, something like an opinion stated as a statement about, China. And because you don't know about it, you give the benefit of the doubt. It sort of registers as you just give it the benefit of the doubt, even though you just read
Yeah.
something from the same source that is not true. You just like sort of instantly forget that they don't know everything and give them the benefit of the doubt on things. So I'm wondering if sort of as you see things on China, it comes in through like a different filter for you. But also that was, like 10 plus years ago. So it might be a little different for just the timing of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I was always pretty well read and curious, right? So like I always like would look at things and be very like,
Skeptical.
curious and try to, yeah, and just take on as much information like as a water hose. And like even till to today, like I am like insatiably curious and water hose information like to a point where I could like probably, is detrimental to other parts of my life. And I've always been like that, right? Since I was a kid. So like that like I think like that the distrust in media, like the gentleman effect you're saying, like where it's like you realize there's like errors in the reporting, or it's like with a certain bent or slant. Like, I'm not sure when I realized that, but I always have been someone with enough agency, certainly to been like, I'm gonna take all information and then I'm gonna have my own view or opinion on something, right? Like I'm not just gonna take someone's view and like, make it my own without
Yeah.
consideration.
Well, it's
So
interesting. Let me just interject there because it touches on a subject that I think is pretty interesting. I think, I get, I believe you that you do that. Like I also think of myself as someone who does that, but I think we both probably do that, like not to speak for you, but just generally like sort of at a high level, I think we both probably do that much more so than the average person. And so that leads us to say, and maybe even like complete outliers on it, maybe even like, maybe you're in the 99.9th percentile of like, not just accepting what sort of the
yeah,
inputs tell you. But I think it's possible that that entire spectrum exists at like a much more extreme level than we can sort of intuit. That basically, like these inputs that you're taking in, as skeptical as you want to be and as independent minded as you want to be, like the default is just accepting. And it's
yep,
like that might be the case much more so than most people think. And so this is actually, I did one of these episodes or recorded one of these with with Phil. I don't know in what order these are all going to release, but Phil is
Mhm.
like, he runs the books channel on Farcaster. He loves reading, and I like reading. I respect people who love reading like a lot more than I do, who read a lot more than I do. But for the longest time, I like one of my weirdest things is like I never really read as like a kid. I ignored school assignments and like never read for fun really, and I picked up reading like very relatively late. And part of the reason was because I mean, as a kid, I didn't have this like, thesis. I probably just didn't want to do my homework or whatever. But, and I did like, I read like Magic Treehouse or whatever in like third grade or, whatever.
Sure.
I'm talking about like, you know, middle school, high school, even through college to a large degree. Um, and, mostly it was probably just like I said, like not wanting to do my homework, having some satisfaction and being able to like, do well in school by like listening in class, but not actually doing the readings or whatever, and like picking things up that way, which I actually think can be, you know, pretty beneficial in terms of just like being able to listen to sort of like figure things out, stuff like that. But one of the reasons, like as I started to sort of like understand why I wasn't doing it, I think was I I used like I remember I said this thing to my mom once, which was that I think books can be very dangerous, and she like hated that because she was like she was an author and she like loved books, and the reason I said that it's like a little bit of like it's a little bit of like a clickbaity headline or whatever, but the reason I said that is because I think that people to a much greater degree than they think accept everything that they read. Like you can think that you're reading something
Yeah.
with an independent mind and skeptical, but you're not like analyzing every word. It's like you're not deciding at every point if you're going to accept this piece of information. Like the default is to accept, and once in a while you ask a question, or maybe you finish the book and you question like the main thing or like a few points of it or whatever. But like in general, it's just like ingesting. And so I don't know what I ingested
Yep.
in lieu of reading these books. But I am actually glad in retrospect that like I basically because now I read and I have for several years, 10 plus years, whatever. But I started at a point where I was, I think, in a much better position to curate and select what I wanted to read, and certainly I didn't let like school syllabus determine that for me, which I think might have been a good thing, especially like my high school, like looking back, was like quite liberal, maybe overly so, and so like some of these things, it's like you sort of like avoid the Kool-Aid or whatever. I don't know. It's just it's an interesting aside, I think, to that point of like I totally like I can tell just by we've had a couple conversations. Like I know you're an independent thinker, and I know that you're evaluating things for yourself, and I like to think, like I said, that I do the same. But I think people just really my gut is that people really overestimate or underestimate how difficult that is, like to actually do that very
Yeah.
prevalently, and how much just actually just sinks in by default.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, right? And I kind of think about it as like in two kind of ways, right? Perspective. It's like, have you had, when you were growing up or as you were young, like, were you forced to take different perspectives, right? Because, like, I don't know if this is fully true, but like, one of the things I think about is like, my parents were always divorced, from the time I was like 1 or 2 years old. So, like, the different perspectives that they both had on like me, the way I should be brought up, or like school or sports, or like their different perspectives, right? Being forced to like adjust to different perspectives, I think is um a unique skill. And like for
Hmm.
me, at an early age, I was like, I don't know if I was taught, but I learned how to like look through and view it from a certain viewpoint, right? Even if it
Right.
was a viewpoint that I didn't agree with, right?
Right.
And like that, I think allowed me to, really have the perspective. And in conjunction with that, I was given a ton of agency when I was young, right?
Right.
Because I was in the middle of my parents and like they didn't get along, they didn't speak to each other. And like I had a lot of agency to maneuver. Um, and like even for me, like moving from a small town to like Tulsa and going to a private high school, whenever I was like in eighth or ninth grade, like that was like pretty much fully my decision. Like, like I had the full agency at that point, and like that, really carried me. I think through a lot of parts of my life, and always allowed me to kind of just being like I'm going to have these decisions, but I also want to like take in various inputs before I have a real perspective on something, right?
Right.
Um,
That's a wild
and
that's a wild insight. Like I've never heard that, and it makes so much sense that basically you have, first of all, it's a sort of a combination of two things. First of all, that you had this agency to be independent minded, but more importantly, like the not more importantly, but the thing that actually stands out more is like you basically grew up from as long as you can remember with two like equally competing, roughly primary perspectives that differed significantly. And so from as long as you remember, you've been in this position of basically um, you know, reconciling two primary perspectives, and that's like the world that you know from like
yeah,
from the very beginning. And I think that's really interesting. Like some people could have a different version of that, I suppose. Like if they're being told something significantly different in school than they're being told at home or something like that. But any situation in which you're getting two like very different points of view, especially on sort of like choices you should make or ways that you should live.
yeah,
That's just a really interesting actual like sort of some people might like say like yeah I'm independent minded, but it's like hard to trace why. But I think that actually makes a ton of sense as like sort of the origin for the way that you see the world.
yeah. I mean, and like, look, like it doesn't mean it wasn't hard at times, but like now that I'm grown up and like I wouldn't trade it for anything, like that perspective and that like, and I think like to distill it a bit down is like you hear this phrase like, oh, through some like view it through someone else's eyes, right?
Right.
And like that, you hear that thrown around a lot, but very few people actually try to put themselves in someone else's shoes, right? They actually try to see it, the motivations, the reasons they believe or think something a certain way, and really try to get inside that person's head or viewpoint, right? And like, I think I was kind of forced to do that at times whenever I was younger. And like, it's helps me a lot throughout life because if I have a disagreement or like I'm like, why is that person doing that or whatever, I like really will try to like put myself in their shoes or like think about it more.
Yeah.
And it's served me well.
I think it's a really it's sort of leading into another trait. I would say that it's like consideration for others slash like thoughtfulness. And this is definitely something that like I'm aware of, for myself. I think I have like sort of like to your point, I think most people just don't really put themselves in other people's shoes. I think I do it more than most. And I'm not saying that even as like a braggy thing. I think
Sure.
there's certainly good elements to it, but there's definitely some negative sort of repercussions of it as well. It can be almost paralyzing. And what I mean by that is like, so I don't know exactly like sort of how I've become this way, but I know I can see the same trait like in my mother. And probably she's just, she's so kind and caring and nice and selfless and everything that, um, she's like the type of person who like make friends with like the checkout person at like, the supermarket or like basically anyone she encounters in everyday life. Whereas I'm just kind of like, got my headphones in, I'm like going around like doing my thing. And it's just like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just like different people sort of have like different ways that they sort of do things or whatever. Like I like to think that I'm a good guy and like a nice person as well, but like in my own sort of like ways.
Sure.
And So anyway, with her, she's like even more so than me. She is considering like with a lot of things how she does. I don't think she would mind me saying this, otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. But like she will consider how everyone in the situation is going to feel about something, and it's a very tall task to do that consistently with like all decisions. It's too much. It's like too much. It becomes too selfless. It's too much worrying about how people are going to feel. Ultimately, you
Yeah.
can never know. And so it's like there's pros and cons, but the pro is that like, I mean, I don't know. I don't even know that I can describe it succinctly, but being able to see situations from different people's perspectives. I mean, just for one example, it's like tremendously useful in like a, negotiating context or something like that, where like, I think that the success case for any negotiation is not like beating the other person, but rather finding the things that gaining like an intimate awareness of what each party involved really cares about and what they don't care about, and almost like comparing those to the market. So someone might really care about something that the average person wouldn't really care about at all. And then the other person doesn't care about something that the average person would care about a lot. And so you can assume if someone's like really far off from the average, that the other party probably, or, in this case, the other party is maybe yourself, and like you care about that roughly an average amount or whatever. And so the other person, you find an arrangement where the other person compromises significantly on the thing that most people would care about, but they just really don't. And then you can afford to give them, the thing that you weirdly don't care about, but most people would. And that's like the most successful negotiation, or the most successful like sort of deal. I don't even really like the word negotiation, honestly. Like, I think it implies confrontation. And but I do like deals. Like, I think there are good, you can make great deals, and it's by putting yourself in those shoes. And that's just like one situation in which it's helpful.
Yeah, there's a couple things there. Like, last thing, something that always stuck with me, like since I was like in high school, was that I got a high school basketball coach that said like one of his favorite things to say was, "There's no resolution without confrontation." And like, that's so true, right? Like, you have to be direct. You have to confront whatever the main thing is, the main issue, the main differing point, whatever it is, to resolve it, right? And like, that is a part of negotiation. That's a part of like relationships. That's a part of any friction you come across in your life, right? And I think like what you're saying here, or what you mentioned, is being able to see from a different person's point of view is just being able to see it, right? You may disagree with it just as strongly as if you didn't look at it through that person's point of view, right? But I think you're generally better equipped to handle situations whenever you've gone through that exercise, or can go through that exercise. And like, as it relates to like, the example with your mom, like, I don't really think of it similarly with like decision making. Like, I've been in professional environments where there's like decision by committee, and it is generally results in some of the worst decisions, or complete indecision. And like, that's really messy, right? Now, like, perspectives and decision making are kind of different, right? They're related, but they're not the same thing. And if you're the person that has to make the decision or has to make the call, if you can see it from everyone's point of view, you're better equipped to deal with it, right? Individually, overall, even if you as the person are, the absolute decision maker, have to make a call that's like a 50-50 call, right? Just being able to see it from different points of view, I think, is allows you to manage those types of things better.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that it's interesting quote from your coach. I had something similar I heard at some point that stuck with me like a long time ago, which was like, in a team context, like storming has to happen before performing. I forget what the exact quote was, but it's like, it stuck with me because I've had life experiences which have suggested that it's not true, but I still kind of give it the benefit of the doubt that like to the idea that it is true. And what I mean by that is like this idea that like storming comes before performing implies that like you can have like a happy-go-lucky start to like a team, and like things can be going well, but like they won't actually, like, you actually won't be like locked in like crushing until you've gone through something like really tough. And so the parts where I've doubted this is like, I've been a part of teams that seem to be performing well, or had relationships that seem to be going well without the storm. And that's just like, we've never really stormed here, but we seem to be performing. But then, the counter argument to that, I think, is like, maybe, even though this seems like it's performing, if you were to have a storm, how much better could you actually perform? And the thing that lends me to believe, that may be true is something more similar to like, well, I did experience this with sports teams growing up. And then, second to that, just in relationships, like sometimes you have like a little bit of a, hard times make it like strengthen the relationship. And, pledging actually in college was like, it's hard to make as good of friends as I made pledging during college. Even if I don't have as much similarities with some of them, it's just, that is like the ultimate storm to a large degree. I mean, there's probably like not to compare it, but like there's like
Yeah.
sports, there's like pledging, there's like, the most extreme probably is like war or something, or like, working in a hospital with like a team where there's like genuine emergencies. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's like a number of investment banking, honestly, is pretty, can be
Yeah.
pretty similar. So there's a few situations like that.
Yeah, I mean it's like team building in high school or like any group activities, right? Or like college. Like I pledged to a fraternity and like went through that, and like that, is you're that's kind of an artificial difficult situation so that it bonds people together, right? And
Yeah.
I think like beyond that, it's like work environments, right? There's like trying work environments or work environments where no one's really happy, or it's just it's a tough time, or just like a ongoing like sludge of like shit that no one's really excited about, be it like it bonds people together, right? Tough times or difficulties or whatever, right? It's like we got through that together, right? And even if it wasn't by choice, like it does bond people. And I think that's you know call it sports, call it life, call it whatever it may have you, but like it's certainly true across environments, I think.
Right. So I know, I just took a look at my watch and I realized we're coming up on time for
I
our.
I can go probably for another 10 minutes after, so we have a little bit of time.
Okay. So that is enough time. I was going to say I don't want to get into based, switching gears pretty heavily, but that was interesting. Like it's funny. You would never you couldn't, nor would you ever create an agenda for the discussion that we've had so far. It,
Yeah,
it
no
has
way.
to be it has to be serendipitous, or not serendipitous. What's the word? Spontaneous. And that's part of the reason I'm so interested with this new podcast that I'm trying, is that my normal one, I feel I put pressure upon myself to prepare a lot, and I think it's beneficial to a large degree. Like I get through some of the things I want to get through, and even then I leave a ton of room for spontaneity. So I basically have like a prep sheet that is it's disorganized. There's not like written questions. It's more so just a bunch of notes and context for me to have to be able to sort of like help navigate the conversation in ways that I think are interesting and like up the guest's alley. We don't have to sort of like navigate as much because I sort of like know interesting places to go. But it's still like very spontaneous. But then what I basically realized was like some of the ones I prepare for less and thus are more spontaneous because I'm not trying to sort of drive in certain directions, can end up being as or more interesting. They're just sort of a different flavor. And so I don't really want to change my approach with my main podcast because I like it for a lot of reasons. I think, I don't have like huge audience or anything, but those who do listen tend to enjoy the style. And I actually love the prep part. Like I enjoy it, but
Mhm.
there's a constraint. There's like sort of a bottleneck. Like you can't prepare to the level that I prepare for those episodes. And for example, do a recording every day.
Right.
But if you remove that sort of time attachment with each episode, then I could have conversations with people from Farcaster a lot. And it's just a different thing. So it's interesting. So anyway, one of the things coming in that I want to talk about that I didn't know we would have time for with 10-minute stuff, but I think we do with closer to 20 or 15 or whatever, is I did want to talk about your Based project. I think it's really cool. It's like, I'm working on Base Colors, as you know, we've talked about, and there's few projects on Base that I think are like just very fundamental, simple, and that's the sort of style of stuff that I like. There's no offense to some of these other projects, but there's a ton of interesting projects, but just like the more it gets, just like I own some Dogwoof hat as a disclaimer or whatever. So like I'm not above this stuff, but it's just kind of silly, and like I like the stuff that's a little bit more, I don't know, interesting, experimental, doing things that can only be done in crypto, etc.
Yep.
And I feel like Based is very much that. And so I'd love to hear sort of like the origin story for how it came about, and just maybe even before that, just like what it is in the simplest terms for people who don't know. And then maybe we could talk about sort of like some of the decisions, start there, but then I might have some
Yeah.
questions on some of the like particular decisions.
Yeah. So like Base is an experiment. It was an experiment that took a Coinbase NFT that was called Base Introduced. and allowed people to come to a website and redeem that NFT for an allocation of based token, which is a ERC20 token on Base. You could think of it similar to like a lot of meme coins. Like based is also like a pretty common cultural term, not only within crypto but outside of crypto. So I kind of thought that was a fun piece of it. But that's what it is. And the origin of it was back in February of 2023. Coinbase announced Base, that they were going to launch this blockchain called Base. It was an Ethereum L2. And whenever they did this, they created a NFT called Base Introduced and launched it on Zora. Zora was like at the time really popular within crypto circles for free mints, right? For mints that cost like a dollar or two, but were deemed free because they were like essentially gas only or didn't have a high price to them.
Right.
So Coinbase kind of hopped on this trend, minted this as a commemorative thing whenever they announced Base. It was on mainnet Ethereum. So it cost people like anywhere between like $7 and $10 to mint it. And they minted
at that time, this was a mainnet. I actually don't know that much about the NFT itself. That was a mainnet free NFT. So you'd pay, $0 plus gas, but gas was actually relatively significant versus, for example, since, I think Zora subsequently moved to, these quote unquote free NFTs that, the gas was like the Zora protocol gas, which was like much lower as like an L2. But back then it was like free plus mainnet gas, which is like actually reasonably far from free. Like it's going to be maybe several dollars.
Exactly, right. And like the L2s weren't really there at this time, right? You had Polygon, which like was a side chain, people call it L2, whatever you want to call it. Like
right.
And there was cheaper things on Polygon, but like most of this time was like mostly Ethereum people on mainnet, kind of NFT types and pure interested in NFTs were minting all these like quote unquote free NFTs that were, had no cost, but they still required gas to mint, right? To your point. And that was anywhere from like $5 to $15, depending on kind of like where Ethereum was at that time.
It's
later in
interesting. I wonder, sorry to interrupt, but I wonder if at that time, like I think Optimism was around, right? For at least, almost for a while, I think at that point. And so I wonder if, if Base knew, I would think Base knew at that point that they were going to build like, as part Optimism. Of what's now called like the super chain or whatever. So it's curious that they didn't mint it on there, but I know Optimism also never really was something that became a thing with NFTs. So I guess the bigger audience is going to be on mainnet,
and even
it's more expensive.
And even period, right? There wasn't that many like applications. Like I don't think that many people had like, like say Ethereum or money on Optimism, the chain to mint stuff just to pay for gas, right? This was also in a time that like I was really excited because I was minting all these random free NFTs. Like I was just like enamored by it. Like I loved what Jack Butcher was doing at the time, which was a $7 NFT that ended up going to like thousands of dollars. And like he had a whole experiment with it that I really loved. And at this time, this entire like meta of free mints was really only happening on mainnet Ethereum. So it would have been odd to do it anywhere else really at that time.
Yeah, makes sense.
So Coinbase did this and they minted 485,000 of them across like 370,000 unique wallets. So like a crazy number of NFTs at the time. Like we've seen a lot bigger ones now that like there's L2s and cheaper or whatever. But at the time, like you rarely saw an NFT get to this many mints. Like it was just crazy. And the fact that there was like that many plus that large number of unique wallets, because on the Zora front end, it only lets you mint one per wallet. You could get around that in some ways if you were like minting directly from the contract or a bit more technically savvy, and you wanted to do it. But if you did it, you were essentially like trying to airdrop farm that they may do something with this NFT in the future, right? Highly unlikely if you kind of like were really being realistic.
And just the fact that you have to do more than go through the front door to mint it, like just so few people are going to do that.
Well, yeah, that plus you still had to pay the gas, right? You still had to pay $7 to $10 per NFT. It wasn't like there was like necessarily that many savings by minting a lot. So that happened, and this was, and I remember being at ETH Denver around this time, and I was joking with a friend of mine. I was like, what if this is the base token, right? Everyone was talking about Coinbase launching a token. All these other L2s had tokens, whether it was like Optimism or Arbitrum or whatever else. And I was like, this is the proxy base token, right? Like this is the NFT that like, is going to, cr- could it trade like a proxy base token and be like a, synthetic like valuation of base? Pretty
Right.
far-fetched idea, probably pretty unlikely, but it was kind of a fun like thing to think about, right? And we got excited talking about this at ETH Denver. Actually, it was actually after ETH Denver when a few of us went to go ski. And it was kind of like we were all hanging out and just like bullshitting about this idea. And that's literally the origin of base. And it kind of was an idea that just stuck with me. And then fast forward, 6 months, 18, a year later, more than, well, base is live now, right? Like they did this commemorative NFT on mainnet when base wasn't live, right? But this NFT is to commemorate base. So I was like, that's kind of a fun piece here. Like, this is supposed to be a commemorative thing that's celebrating base, but it's not on chain on base, it's on Ethereum. There needs to be some sort of like connection here, right? Or something. It's interesting. So it was an idea that like just stuck with me. And I was trying to figure out like what's a fun experiment or something to do with it. And like earlier this year in May, I kind of put together, I was like, oh, well, I'm going to take people that have this NFT and they're going to be able to come verify that they own it in this wallet and then like essentially like redeem it for an allocation of based, right? It's bringing this NFT or the people, these wallets to base. And why is that interesting? Well, one, I can do it permissionlessly. I don't have to have Coinbase's permission to do this, right? Like public blockchains, this interoperability of this stuff and the permissionlessness of this stuff is really exciting and very unique to crypto. So like that's interesting. Two, like everyone who minted this thing was aware of Base, right? Like they probably ended up doing something or putting a transaction through on Base once it launched 6 months later. So there was a certain level of intent that you're interested in Base. So and maybe transacting on it. So like that's interesting. And the distribution as like number three is interesting, right? Like there's 370,000 unique wallets. Like what else in crypto have we ever seen that has like that number of unique wallets? Like very little, if anything, outside of like maybe a Uniswap airdrop because there was that many wallets that hit that DApp, that hit that.
Another one. Another one is like ENS names. I think there's like a few million of them. I don't know how many unique.
Yeah.
It's probably more, like the average is probably more than 1 point something. It's probably like, I don't know what, maybe 2 or 3. But are you aware, I'm just curious as a little bit of a sidebar, are you aware of other examples? Like, did you ever look for like sort of a definitive, like there's all this like BS out there that's like, oh, here's something with like 7 million, but it's like, what is that? Like, I don't like, it's like some random thing, but yeah.
There is things, but they were airdropped. Right? Like there's things that
permissionlessly.
Permissionlessly, right? Whereas like the thing that's interesting about this is the fact that this NFT required action, right? It required intent. Like you had to go push the button, pay $7 to $10, mint this thing into this wallet, right?
Right. Whether I think the combination of intent plus cost, it's basically that's the interesting thing. That's the thing I would like to see the leaderboard of basically. And like ENS obviously qualifies as well. But I don't know how many things are on that list that are, like you said, and 300,000 or more.
Yeah, I did dig deeper. I couldn't find anything that had intent and and that had the same asset. Like even in the ENS example, right? They're all unique assets. Like yes, everyone owns an ENS, or a lot of unique wallets do, but like you can't it'd be difficult or more difficult to index that and try to pull those wallet addresses. You could do it, but it's a bit different. And people mint ENS things for all different kinds of reasons, right? Whereas like people minted this Coinbase thing,
single purpose.
Sure, mostly, right? There was definitely some people were trying to farm it. Most people just wanted it as a commemorative thing in their wallet, but there was some speculative aspects to it for sure. Be it airdrop farming, be it speculative, like thinking this thing's going to go up, whatever it may be, thinking it's a base proxy token, right? So that, and I was like, that's kind of where the idea came from. And I was like, oh, if I can do this and I can get enough attention by getting people to redeem this, a year later, like maybe most of these wallets, a lot of these wallets might not even be active. How many people churned and just like aren't active on chain today, right? That have this thing in their wallet? Probably quite a few. And I was like, if I can get a significant number of those 370,000 unique wallets, or a significant number of these NFTs from 485,000 like redeemed, well, like this token could launch with a pretty decent distribution, right? 20, 30, 40,000 holders like on launch. Like that's pretty interesting.
Right.
And that's really it, right? I think like that was the start of it. And then I also like I didn't want to airdrop because to our earlier point, like I think intent matters. I think taking an action and then getting something for it or something happening because of it is important. And it's so what I did, fast forward to July, I based evo.fun. I tried to explain this concept and why I thought it was interesting as clear as possible. At the expense of like text heavy website basically. And you could, the first 10 days, if you came and redeemed an NFT, you got 500,000 base, and you couldn't claim it until the token launched, right? Which I communicated was like August 13th, and it was going to be that date, right? So come back August 13th, you can get your token. And I did it for the first 10 days, you got 500,000. The second 10 days, you got 250,000. And then if you did it after the token launch, you got 25,000. So there was an incentive to do it earlier and do it. You saw a lot of like trading active, some people speculating on buying these NFTs, etc. And I did it this way instead of burning it. Right, I could have like set up something to burn these NFTs on mainnet and then like more of like transfer them to base. I didn't do that for a couple reasons. One, it would have incurred mainnet gas fees. So you would have had to pay, anywhere from like $5 to $10 to like burn one of these NFTs and like redeem it. Like that didn't seem ideal. So two, I like Base. I like Coinbase. I didn't want to like burn a piece of history for them, right? Like it's not something that's like this has never been meant to be adversarial. I just thought it was like a cool thing of like permissionlessness and interoperability. So for those reasons, I was a redeem. And like how I did that was you basically sent a transaction from your wallet on Base that checked that you had this NFT in your wallet and checked the token ID of that NFT and then redeemed it. And because that was on chain, because that transaction was on chain with the contract, it basically each NFT, each token ID could only be redeemed once, right? So people hypothetically, and some people did from what we saw, redeemed them and then listed them on OpenSea, right? And just sold them because other people like wanted to buy one because they wanted to redeem one or whatever. And, that was a trade-off. And by not burning them, I allowed people to basically trade these things, whether they redeemed or not, right? And
that wasn't. Couldn't you not redeem it the same one twice?
You couldn't. That's what I'm saying, though. But some people like bought one that was already redeemed,
and then they had the issue of like, hey, I just bought one of these to get the base, and now I can't get it, so like they're a little upset or whatever.
Yeah, and what I did, and I did this from the very start, was there was a token checker on the website.
Yeah, I saw this. Yeah, that's how I knew like there was something where I forget what I was looking at exactly, but it was like, this token's not going to work for redemption.
Yeah, so but some, it's crypto, so people are just going to ape in and not read. It's just part of it, right? And some people, and so I tried to, do everything I could to like let people know what it is and try to be as transparent as possible and yada yada. And most people, there was a few random messages and stuff that were peeved about this, but like, it was like if you would have read and like looked at this, you would have realized, right?
Right.
But like still, people like, felt like they just burned money for nothing. So I'm like sympathetic to a degree.
Right. And you can't design something for every edge case, though. Like it's just, and especially if it's on, you did the best you can, so it makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm doxxed, right? Like people know this was me. Like I was doing it, so like my reputation is priceless to me. Like it's not worth any amount of money. Right. And so I was very, careful to try to do this as like clear, fairly, and transparently as I could, and kind of did that throughout. And we can keep going here because I'm sure you got to have some questions, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I realize we're up on time. You want to go like five and then we can call it.
Yeah, we can keep going. Yeah, I have some time.
So I guess where was I gonna go? So yeah, I mean the burning, it's interesting, like as I was, developing or designing rather, like base colors, making all the sort of determining what I thought the important decisions were and then making them. Like I went through and I sort of like graded every decision from like 1 to 10 and sort of tried to make the ones that I had as like sixes or sevens or eights, try to see if I can make them eights or nines or tens. And I was like really happy with where things landed. And of course, I might have missed some things that were important decisions. I haven't really found them yet, but like it was an interesting exercise. And so I like thinking about things from that perspective for basically like designing any project. And I feel like with base, like you walked through one decision in particular. I mean, you walked through a bunch, but like one in particular was like this decision not to like burn and instead to redeem. And to me, like for all the reasons you said, that's like a 9 or 10 out of 10 conviction decision. Like that just when you started describing why you didn't do that, my first thought was like, why would you do that? And then you described like reasons why you didn't, and I was like, yeah, I mean, this makes a ton of sense. I would have never like that would not have been the move. It would have been, like you said, like sort of adversarial. It would have been costly with the main net. It just there's just no. I think it's much harder to answer the question of why would you do that than why wouldn't you. You're gonna say something.
I was going to say it was also like crucial to let this experiment potentially play out the way I wanted it to, right? Because I wanted it to leverage like the distribution and the interoperability that that distribution enabled with like the permissionless environment of public
Right.
blockchains.
I
So
think it's way more positive, like the way I really liked the way you did it. Even if there was, a couple of edge cases, a couple of people upset, you even, foresaw that issue and tried to write as clearly as you could about it and like put the proper warnings. Like that stuff takes time to build, like into the UX. Like that's not just doing that. Like you didn't have to do that. Like you chose to do that to sort of mitigate this one potential like sort of counterpoint or whatever to the way that you designed. So like that all makes good sense. The questions that I have more, they're like very in the weeds, but um, around this, like, the earlier you are, the bigger reward you get. It cuts 50% and then it cuts 10x. And then like you're not getting it. So that's one thing. It's like that cut by 50% and then cut by 10x based on timing. Like how you decided you wanted to do that in the first place. And then like roughly like was there sort of a reason why it like cuts, in half and then
yeah,
more severely by an order of magnitude. And then secondarily to that, but related, um, why come back later to do the claim instead of just like you're here now, you can get it? Because that adds some friction too, right?
yeah. So a couple things here. Um, it was tricky to manage like launching a token and redeeming it, right? Like if I would have like the incentive and the like speculative nature of crypto where it's like, hey, redeem this thing and then I'm going to launch it, maybe it's worth something, maybe it's not, right? Like and so I think like front loading it being like if you saw this, you have 10 days. Like there's you want to front load the action, right? You want to be like, hey, I'm doing this thing, go do something, right? Go do this action. And there's a clear incentive mechanism to use it to do that, right? You have more reward if you do it earlier, right?
Right.
And there was also an incentive for people to tell others or to help share or, be like, oh, if anyone holds this NFT, you should do it before this ends because, like, it's more reward, right? So that's part of it. And I just think like the like the 50% cut and then the huge 10 cut is because like I wanted all these people to redeem this thing before the token actually launches. So the huge cut from the second 10 days to post launch, like what I called phase 3 redeems, is because this experiment really works in terms of distribution is if everyone redeems before the token launches, right? So there's that part of it. And then the other thing is that the way I did the tokenomics here is I was like 50% of the total token supply is going to be to phase to the redeemers that you redeem before the token launches.
Right.
So proportionally, they're equally rewarded depending on how many NFTs they redeemed, up to 50%. So it wouldn't like for a couple reasons between the incentive mechanism and the tokenomics of it, like doing a redeem and instant claim like kind of would have deaded this experiment, right? No one would have done it. Like there's no incentive, there's no like speculative aspect to drive the distribution, to drive everything else. And that is kind of why I went about it that way. And it was also tricky, right? Because like I actually didn't know the total supply or what the total supply of Based was going to be until I closed phase two, right? So to properly proportionally reward people, I couldn't like arbitrarily say this is the supply,
Right.
right? Like the supply was dictated by how many people decided to come and redeem, you know?
At what times as well?
Yeah, exactly. At what times as well, right? So there was these variables that were out of my control that, you know, essentially the market, you know, or the people that held these NFTs dictated.
And the other 50% is for independent from these NFT redemptions, to be sort of like at at your discretion or
Well,
however. Like what
so the other 50%, there's 35% that I had allocated for like LP to like create a market for it, right?
Yeah.
And I struggled with how to do this properly, fairly, safely. And the best thing I came up with was splitting that 35. Half of it went to a party DAO, and it was like, hey, if you want to help like fund this like LP for Based, contribute to this party DAO, and 100% of the ETH that this party DAO raises is going to get locked in to an LP with the other 17.5% of the 35, right?
Right.
So anyone who contributed to that party DAO got a proportional amount of that 17.5%. And it ended up being, I forget, I think if you contributed 0.01 ETH, you ended up getting like 6 or 7 million Based, I believe, if I recall correctly. It raised 50 ETH in 3 days.
Wow.
So there was 50 ETH that was locked in with 17.5% of the supply into a Uniswap LP, and I locked that contract forever. So like I can't rug it, I can't pull that money out. It is in the market, locked into that contract. I can't touch it, right? No one can. It's completely locked unless Based fully goes to zero and everyone sells it. Then that ETH will get completely drained. But that's the only way that could happen.
And that's like that's reason like feasibly that's basically impossible.
Exactly. Right. And it just seemed like the fairest and most transparent way to do this. And I didn't know another way because, like, you know, I didn't want to like take fees. I didn't want to take money, yada, yada, yada. Like, I didn't want to do anything like that. I just wanted to like launch this experiment and, you know, I was a steward of it. Right. So that brought us up to 85%. I kept 5% for what I call like Based experiments, which is to give Based to other applications, projects on Based who want to do something interesting with the token, right? They want to integrate it, give it away to their users, you do a tournament with it, X, Y, or Z.
Right.
We've given out I've given out like maybe almost 1%, you know, out of that 5 to some stuff, and we'll do some more stuff like Base colors, right? And that's really just like my discretion. I'm never going to sell it, of course, or anything. It's just purely for experiments, for people to like do stuff with the token on chain. And then the last 10% I kept as like a future airdrop, right? Something I really just kept that so that if there's another experiment I want to run with this token in the future, I have one lever to pull.
Right.
And you know, there's a Based People PFP project and some mechanisms around that that'll, you know, leverage, you know, either that 5% experiments or the 10% airdrop, and just stuff like that. So that's where the rest of it's at. But you know, it's so that's 85% is like fully out there floating. And I also closed the redeems on October 1st. So the total supply is like 75 billion. And that's not increasing. That'll be the final total supply.
Nice. Well, that's all very interesting. And I'm curious, I guess maybe this is sort of end on this because I know we're way over time, but did you have like this is all like these are tough decisions. Not tough, but like you sort of have a blank slate and like you can find some precedents to work off of or to go from. Did you have like was this knowledge around how to that sort of informed these decisions around tokenomics? Was that from just sort of like independent, your obsession with crypto over the years and seeing different projects and actually having like a
Yeah.
curiosity about how tokenomics work, or were there particular projects that you took guidance from? How'd you go about like what were your inputs for sort of
Yeah. I
even
think it was just
beginning on
like
tokenomics?
I think it was just my aggregate experience of seeing things, right? Like I've been very active in crypto. I've seen all kinds of tokenomic structures, right? From like meme coins all the way to like how Ethereum or Solana is structured, right? To things way in between that swath, right?
Right.
Um, so I really like I talked to a few people about it, like a few friends. Like I can think of like two conversations that I had as I was figuring out this stuff, but really just my own experience like informed it. And just trying to be very thoughtful around like what is the clearest, fairest, most transparent way to do this that like doesn't leave me exposed reputationally, um or like would result in adverse effects where someone could like the honestly within this thing, the thing that really I struggled with the most was the LP, and I thought I figured it out from the start, and I didn't. I had it wrong. Um, because what I wanted to prevent by doing the party DAO is I didn't want to launch this token and then some sniper buy up a ton of the supply, right? And like buy 5 or 10% of the supply and effectively hold the rest of it hostage, right? That he's just going to dump if this thing ever pumps.
Hmm.
So like the party DAO mitigated that. And even when I did the party DAO, because the way the party DAO was structured, I tried to tell people like, hey, you shouldn't really put much ETH into this thing because you don't know if some crazy like degen is going to come in and put 4 or 5 or 10 ETH into this thing. And all of a sudden you're contributing to like the launch of Base at a way higher market cap than you wanted, than you think it's
Right.
worth. Right.
Right.
Because if like only one ETH got locked into the LP with 17.5%, well, it's launching at a pretty low market cap, right? But if 20 ETH gets locked into it with 17.5%, it's launching at 20 times the market cap, right? Um, and like that's what I tried to tell people is like, hey, you really should probably not contribute to this until like the very end because it was open for 3 days and it was uncapped because I didn't want to price set. Like if I would have said like this is the target, it would have been me price setting what I think this thing is worth. And
Right.
I never wanted to do that. Right. Um, so I just left it open for 3 days and I try to tell people like, hey, the safest thing to do here is to wait until the last hour and to see what this is at and to see if you think it's like a reasonable amount to like contribute to. Right. So that was a really hard decision in terms of like figuring out some things. Um, which was actually a harder decision for me than like figuring out the tokenomic splits and how that was going to work. So
Yeah. Um, cool. Well, I know we're way over, but it's been an awesome conversation from the early stuff and then closing with deep dive on Based. And one of the other things I'm excited about for this new podcast is my normal one. I don't really do like repeat guests. Like I've had like I think two guests on like twice out of like 175 or something over 4 years. But with this, I think I can just like I've always been interested in the question. This is actually sort of another piece of the experiment. Is like I've always been interested in the question of like I think there's a lot. My thesis is that there are a lot of conversations that happen in private that could happen in public with no loss or consequence to the participants and with much value to be gained from the people who could have access if they were public. And um, this is somewhat of an experiment in that these conversations that I expect to have on here are ones that probably could pretty easily be done privately and for most people would be just private conversations by default, and I'm just going to experiment with like having a bunch of conversations publicly. I don't know like what the rate of these, this is going to be. I'm not like committing to a specific cadence or something, but like, if we're going to catch up regularly, like, we just spoke for the first time a couple weeks ago or a week ago, and, now today, and I think we've got a bunch more to talk about. And so it's like, if and as we're doing that, just running the experiment of like, what if a lot of the time it's just on the record? And then if there's something that truly needs to be private, for sure. And there are a few things probably, but like a lot of things can just be shared and might be interesting to people. And so I'm looking forward to doing, more of these with people, more time. So looking forward to another one of these, hopefully at some point.
Yeah, likewise. I love that idea. I mean, I think it's like kind of an extension of like the building in public, or I would call it experimenting in public, maybe. But yeah, no, it's that's a cool idea, and I love what you're doing with it. So happy to.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again for going way over and everything and coming on in the first place, and we'll talk more soon.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
Yep. Later.